Hey everyone, welcome to the Productive Dev. My name is Alyssa, and in today's video we're going to be talking about how to automate the process of code formatting and linting using Prettier, ESLint, Husky, and lint-staged. These are kind of the main tools that you would use for this job. Helps you keep a nice and clean and tidy code base. We're going to dive right into Prettier, which is an opinionated code formatter that integrates with many code linters and supports a variety of programming languages. So Prettier intentionally limits the amount of options you can choose so that you spend less time debating over, semicolons or double quotes versus single quotes, and you just can kind of get on with your day. So it saves you time and energy. And Prettier, if you go to the website here, go to their docs, there's a whole section here on what's the difference between Prettier versus linters. Sometimes that can get a little confusing. You can see a list of their options. So example, like you can see semicolons, if you want semicolons or not. If you want quotes, do you want single or double? There's a very small subset of options that you can configure so that your code base can be united and all follow the same kind of pattern. So I have a repository, I forgot to mention that, up here, that if you want to follow along, it has some stuff that's set up already that you can use to follow along with this tutorial. And this is what I'm going to be using. I've already cloned it on my machine. And so what this does is, I already have Prettier installed on my machine, but if you wanted or needed to install that, you could do that there. And then this command will go ahead and create a prettier.json file. And the Prettier file can be in different formats, but I'm just using JSON here for simplicity's sake. And in this JSON file, we have these two options configured, which is single quote set to false. So we'll be using double quotes. That's what that means. And then semicolon is set to true. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second here. And Prettier has a command line interface that you can use, and that's what we're going to be using here for simplicity's sake. But if you wanted to read it more in the documentation, here it is. So if I now go to my code, and so this is the file that we're going to be checking Prettier against. So if I go ahead, and if you notice here, we have single quotes, and we have no semicolons right now. And that's intentional so that when we run the command, you can see what it does. But I copied and pasted that command from the article. And if I do this, so this is running npx Prettier and then the -- check file. And what this -- check file is going to do is show us, what issues or what things have failed the formatting checks. And so if we go ahead and press enter, so notice that it says warning, source counter.js, code style issues found. So this is indicating to us, okay, Prettier found some issues, which we know because there are single quotes in there and there are no semicolons. And so if instead I run npm Prettier check, instead I run npm Prettier write against that same file, now you'll notice, and if you look at maybe helpful to look at the diff, we'll notice now that we have double quotes being used and semicolons have been appended onto the end of the sections. And just to prove it to you, let's look at the diff here, make it a little bit easier to see. So notice here, see, now we have semicolons, and then we have double quotes being used. So this is a command line interface way of running Prettier. Most people use, a plugin, like a VS Code plugin that they can use that will run it on save. I know that's what I use in my IDE, but for simplicity's purpose, I wanted to show you how you can run it from the command line and how when you have things configured in your .prettier.rc file, how it will go ahead and update the file based on the formatting. Okay, so now that we've covered Prettier, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about ESLint. So ESLint is a powerful tool that performs static analysis of your code to identify potential issues and enforce coding standards. So unlike Prettier that I want to say only, but primarily does formatting stuff, ESLint can detect syntax error and potential bugs and deviations from your defined coding style. And so this is widely used in a lot of text editors, providing real-time feedback. So it can also be included as part of your continuous integration pipeline, ensuring that, the code adheres to your project standards. So you can integrate it in a lot of different ways so that it can be run, locally, but also when you're pushing up code to PRs or whatever, a lot of different ways to integrate it. And so again, here is how you would go ahead and install it. Again, this project, if you're using the GitHub repo that I've provided, already has it installed. And then what this does is you can configure ESLint using this following command. I've already run this. This will prompt you with a series of questions, and after installation is complete, it'll create you an ESLint config file. And you can edit and then configure to your liking. So by default, the recommended configurations will be applied, and you can configure some rules so that your file kind of looks something like this. And so when overwriting the rules, there's 3 different severities to keep in mind. So first is like 0. There's 2 different ways you can kind of configure. So 0, which corresponds to or off. You can use 0 or off. There's 1 or warn, and then there's 2 or error. And these 3 severity levels provide you with fine-grained control over how ESLint applies rules. And if you want to see more configuration options, feel free to read the official ESLint documentation on that. I've just intentionally have a very simple set here so that you can see how ESLint will flag things. And then you can also extend ESLint with plugins. So the most common ones that I've used include ESLint plugin JSX A11Y because I'm a big advocate for accessibility. There's also ESLint plugin reactive for using that framework, ESLint plugin React hooks, and then ESLint plugin Storybook. So there's a lot of community plugins that you can leverage to cater things to your needs. Along the lines of plugins, there's also ESLint config Prettier. So the main thing to keep in mind is that Prettier should be used for code formatting concerns, and linter should be used for code quality concerns. And there's a distinction there that's important. So linters often include rules for both code quality and style. However, most style rules aren't needed when using Prettier. So in order to make sure that ESLint does not try to format our code, we need to install the ESLint config Prettier package to prevent the ESLint rules from conflicting with Prettier. And this is kind of an important part here. And so again, the repo I'm using already installs all this, but if you wanted to go in and install it, you install this package into your project here, and then add the ESLint config Prettier to the ESLint config so that it includes the following. And so to ensure that everything is set up properly and that none of the ESLint rules conflict with Prettier, we can use actually a CLI helper tool. This is kind of a neat little thing that I found. And so, for example, if you run npx ESLint config Prettier like this on our source counter.js, it should output no rules that are unnecessary or conflict with Prettier were found. So now if I go back to here and I run that command, yeah, again, no rules or unnecessary or conflict with Prettier were found. So this means that because we've gone ahead and installed that ESLint config Prettier plugin, that we don't have any conflicts between Prettier and ESLint. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and opened up the ESLint config file. You'll see that we have this ESLint config Prettier, and it needs to be the last option on the list. And then we have these rules which says no console warn. So again, this is a very, very basic and stripped down ESLint config. You obviously would have a lot more rules set here, but for simplicity's sake, I just want to show you how I have my ESLint configured and then how it would work. Okay, so now that we verify that there's no conflicts with Prettier and ESLint, we can, similar to how we did for Prettier, run ESLint from the command line and verify that stuff is working as expected. So now we'll leave that open, and then let's actually go back and open up our counter.js function. So notice here that we don't have a console.log at the moment, right? So if I was to run this command, which is npx ESLint source counter.js, we don't get any output. That means that, okay, it passed the ESLint checks and we're good. But if I was to go in and say add a console.log counter, remember that my ESLint config, it says to warn me about console logs being added. So then if I go ahead and run that same command, notice it says warning, unexpected console statement, no console. And this means that it's letting you know, like, hey, there's an issue here. You know, it won't block code commits or anything, but just letting you know that this is an issue and we need to fix it. And then if you wanted to go ahead and change it to be like, you know, error, you could do that. And then if you ran that same command, npx ESLint, now it would say error, unexpected console statement. So that's how you can go and configure it between the different severities. This is also a nice indicator that lets us know that we've successfully installed ESLint because it's able to identify this issue. And so now we'll go back to our article, and the next tool we're going to discuss is Husky. And all these tools work together, and I'm going in this particular order for a reason, so bear with me. So Husky is a tool that allows you to manage Git hooks more easily. And Git hooks are just scripts that run automatically at certain points in the Git workflow, such as before commit or push. And Husky allows you to configure these hooks, making it easier to enforce quality standards, run tests, or perform other tasks automatically as part of the development process. So again, to install Husky, you would do this, run npm install save dev Husky, and my project already has it installed. And then if you want to init Husky, you run this npx command, and that will create a pre-commit script in the .husky directory, and it updates the pre-commit script in package.json. And so to show you what that looks like I said, I've already gone through and run that command, but now we have a .husky folder, and in that folder there is a pre-commit. And I've already configured it, kind of gone ahead already in what we're going to do next. But now we have this pre-commit folder set up for us so that Husky can work on certain parts of when we're using Git. And so this brings us to our last tool, which is lint-staged. And lint-staged enhances the code quality by running linters on files that are staged for commit. So rather than the entire project. So this approach ensures that only the files intended for the next commit are checked, preventing errors from entering the repo and enforcing consistent code style. So by focusing on staged files only, lint-staged significantly reduces the amount of time and resources required for linting. So it's not, parsing your whole code file, only the files that are staged to be committed. And this makes it a practical solution for maintaining code quality without unnecessary overhead. And this tool allows you to provide custom shell tasks on these files, in which you can filter by glob patterns, and allows you to streamline your pre-commit workflow. lint-staged is awesome. I pretty much anytime I'm setting up a new repository, especially at work, these are the 4 tools I always use together, because what I found is that, some people use the Prettier plugin or the ESLint plugin, and so that will alert them of the issues while they're developing. But some people might not use those plugins, and so what would happen is that you would go into a file where somebody didn't have a plugin or make the necessarily Prettier changes or whatever, and then you just make a small change, and the whole diff changes because your formatting ran automatically while when somebody else committed the change it didn't, and it causes these large diffs unnecessarily and just inconsistent code. And so I found that making sure that these tools run just command line via the pre-commit hooks makes it nice and simple, so that anytime it's committing, whether you use a Git GUI or not, it will always run these checks and make sure that the code standard is adhered to. So again, if you want to go ahead and install lint-staged, this is how you would do it. And then we need to set up the pre-commit hook to run lint-staged. And if you remember from that previous section, Husky had created that file so that we can open the file directly and then edit it or run the following command. So then this is echoing the npx lint-staged command to the pre-commit file. If you remember from before, I already had it there, but that would be how you would kind of add the command via the command line. You could also just go in and update the file directly, but that's kind of how the docs direct you to do it. And so then now we need to instruct lint-staged to run Prettier and ESLint. And we can do this by creating a configuration file named lint-staged rc.cjs and adding the following code to it. And this file in particular uses a glob pattern to match all JavaScript files in the source directory, and it lints and formats all stage files that are about to be committed. So that's all this command does. It's saying, hey, look in the source folder, identify all JavaScript files, and then when you do that, remember, this is only running on stage files. We want you to do ESLint-fix, Prettier-write, and that will go ahead and run those 2 commands on it. And so now let's go ahead and go to our counter.js and then play around with this, and we can see kind of how it works. So let me go ahead and clear this real quick. So if I wanted to go and run or commit these changes that I made, remember now that I've gone ahead and already run these commands manually. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to revert or discard the changes that I made to this file. So we're back to single quotes and then no semicolons. And then I have I'm going to actually add back in the console.log so that you can see the error. And then what I'm going to do is actually make this a error, and I think that should prevent the commit from actually going through. And so now if I try to commit this file, so if I do, remember that we have these files are staged. So let me go ahead, stage these files to be committed. If I do git commit -m, let's see, testing, let's see what the output does. Remember, lint-staged is going to run on the stage files. So now we should see running task lint-staged rc.js. It ran ESLint fix and it failed because we have a console.log in there, and I set it so that it could error out on that. And so what that does is it kind of like stashes your changes, checks it. If it's an error and it can't fix it, or there's something that needs to be resolved and it can't automatically fix it, it will fail the commit. So notice that if we do a git status, that we still have these files staged and they were not committed. So this, as you can see, this is kind of a nice way that you can, on commit and on these git commit hooks, you can see how you can really get some power here and ensure that the code quality standard is upkept. So I'm going to go into the ESLint config and actually make this a warn instead so that it won't complain. And I'll go ahead and clear this. And then run the git commit command again. Oh, it failed again. Actually, didn't expect that. But this is actually a good thing. I didn't actually plan this. So the reason it failed, even though I went ahead and changed it to be warn, is because I did not stage this ESLint config file. And so that goes to show you that, remember, it only works on staged files. So now if I was to go ahead and stage the ESLint config and then run that git commit command again, now we should see, okay, everything ran properly. Notice the sync changes, the commit went through, and all was good. So and this is all just showing because I'm on a new computer here for these YouTube videos. But as you can see, this is like a really cool workflow using Prettier and ESLint, and then Husky for the pre-commit hooks, and then lint-staged for when you're about to commit. Like, you can really see how these 4 tools work in tandem to give you a really powerful flow. So hopefully you can start to see the benefits of what these tool offers. Remember, Prettier formats files, ESLint helps you catch potential bugs, Husky makes it easier to create pre-commit hooks, and then lint-staged is really that glue that keeps the automation process consistent. And by leveraging these tools, you can really automate code formatting and maintain a clean and efficient code base. So these tools not only enhance your code quality, but also streamline the development process, and is something that I use a lot when I'm working in my code bases at work. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned something new, and I will catch you next time.